What's up, y'all? Roy here, and you are listening to the Clemens with a Z podcast. Now, I know I haven't stopped sitting with Christianity. It's not like I left the table and now I'm circling back to evaluate it. I think it's always really been there. But lately, as I've grown and shifted and kind of dived into what I believe and all of thoughts and what is God, what is all those things, and I hear certain ideas talked about, especially these ones that are framed as deep high-minded theology. Something in me pauses. A lot of these things, these ideas are presented as like transcendent, beyond human comprehension and higher wisdom. And when I actually sit with them, a lot of them don't feel higher. They feel familiar. Things like obedience feels human. Reward and punishment feels human. Binary thinking, saved or lost, in or out, good and evil, clearly divided, feels human. Even the way that we talk about grace in the church. We say things like, quote unquote, God is love. But then we explain that love through a system where someone has to bleed. Justice has to be satisfied. A payment must be made before forgiveness can happen. And when that tension feels confusing, when we ask questions about it or anything like that, usually the response is God's ways are higher. Now, I'm not really sure if that's mystery. I'm just starting to wonder if it's just human retributive logic wrapped in some kind of sacred language. Because when I look back, my own life, goodness wasn't really rooted in love. It was rooted in a fear of hell, fear of falling out of favor, fear of losing a church, fear of stepping out of the narrow lines. And it wasn't just fear, it was a reward, like heaven, prize, the eternal quote unquote well done. Follow the rules now, cash out later. It's kind of like spiritual capitalism. Void the punishment and earn the reward. And there's this line from the show True Detective that stuck with me for a while, and I kind of think it fits in this. Now, the character Rust Cole talking to the other character, we can't remember what his name is. It's Matthew McConaughey's character talking to Woody Harrelson. He said, if the only thing keeping a person decent is the expectation of some divine reward, then that person is a piece of shit. Sorry, I know, that's a brutal line. But it forces, to me, I think it forces a brutal question. If my goodness is motivated by this fear of punishment or a hope of reward, the question that I say is that really even goodness at all? Or is it just self preservation wearing religious language? Because for me, when I slow down, this whole framework, heaven, hell, punishment, prize, starts to feel less like divine mystery and more like a cosmic version of how humans manage behavior. Gold stars and timeouts, threats and incentives. And that's where the tension begins for me. Because if this is supposed to be divine wisdom, then honestly, why does it look so much like us? Because the pattern is there. It's not just in my old church environment, the ICOC, but across sermons, conferences, podcasts, mainstream evangelical Christianity. There's this constant return to reward and punishment. Do the right thing because otherwise hell or destruction, the narrow path or hell, destruction, all of that. Do the right thing because someday heaven or because God forgave us. And even when that language softens, the structure stays the same. Because grace, sure, grace is free, but it required a violent payment. Cross. God forgives, but justice had to be satisfied first. We say love is unconditional, but someone still had to bleed. Follow the rules. And I'm not saying that sarcastically. I'm trying to say it slowly and let it sit. Because when you trace the logic underneath it, it doesn't sound like transcendent mystery to me. It just sounds more like retributive justice. Someone does wrong, then someone must pay. The balance must be restored through suffering. That makes sense to us because that's how we operate. If someone hurts you, you want repayment. If someone breaks the rule, there's a consequence. If order is disturbed, punishment restores it. That's intuitive. But is that divine? That's the question that my entire journey up till now won't leave me. Because we say things like God is love, but when we say it and then describe love, we describe it as it's requiring violence or punishment before it can forgive. And something never sits right with me in that. I don't think it ever did. But I think what we tend to do is instead of sitting with that discomfort, we often retreat to mystery. We say things like God's ways are higher. We can't fully understand it. It's deeper than human logic. But what if it's not deeper? What if it's just human logic projected upward? What if we've taken our instinct for punishment, baptized it, and called it holy? And then here's where it's going to get personal for me again. Because when obedience becomes the highest virtue, when it's paramount, you know what's necessary? Fear. Because if heaven is the prize, then hell is the threat. And then obedience is no longer transformation, it's just survival. And high control environments just turn that volume up. But the framework is itself, it's not rare, it's familiar. It bleeds into every area of our life. Bleeds into how we parent, punish to teach, threaten to correct, withhold to shape behavior. It bleeds into how we lead, submit or you're rebellious, question and you're dangerous. It bleeds into how we talk to ourselves. One wrong move and you deserve suffering. And all of this, all of that confusion, all of that talk just feels embarrassingly human. And this is where I keep coming back to Jesus. Because if the framework is reward and punishment, and if divine love requires violent payment, if obedience is the highest virtue, then Jesus should reinforce that logic. But when I read the Gospels now and I read it slowly, to me, I see something different. I see someone constantly interrupting retributive instinct. A woman caught in adultery, and instead of satisfying justice, he just diffuses it. A tax collector, not punished, but invited. Enemies, not crushed, but loved. Over and over again, Jesus seems less interested in balancing accounts and more interested in restoring people. And that creates tension because the framework we inherited says justice must be satisfied, payment must be made, punishment restores order. But Jesus continually exposed how addicted we are to that instinct. He doesn't deny justice, he just reframes it. He shifts the question from who deserves what to what restores what was broken. That's not retribution, that's restoration. And I wonder if this is where we've misunderstood him and the whole thing. Because we took a life that consistently disrupted punishment logic and built a theology that re-centered it. We say the cross satisfies divine wrath. But what if the cross exposes human violence? What if it reveals how far we'll go to preserve our systems? What if that's not God demanding blood, but humanity rejecting love? That's not a declaration, that's tension. And instead of sitting in that tension, we often just stop and try to resolve it quickly. You know, God's ways are higher, the narrow way is hard, and don't lean on your own understanding. But maybe the narrow way is hard because it refuses coercion. Maybe it's hard because it refuses to punish enemies. And maybe it's hard because love without threat feels so dangerous. And maybe we keep running to this retributive framework because it feels safer, cleaner, more controllable. And if that's true, really, then what we call this deep theology might just be our need for certainty disguised as wisdom. And the more I look into this and sit with it, the more for me I realize this isn't just a theological debate. I believe it's about what kind of world we believe we're living in. Because if love requires punishment to function, then fear will always be necessary. If forgiveness requires a payment, then someone always has to bleed. If obedience is the highest virtue, then doubt will always feel dangerous. And like I said before, it's not just stays in our church, it's how we parent, lead, talk to ourselves, and imagine God. And I've lived under that framework. I've lived in a space where obedience was paramount, where fear was framed as reverence, and where surrender meant safety. And I understand why that system exists. Because binary thinking is so efficient. Retributive justice feels fair. Certainty is so stabilizing. But I don't think efficiency is the same as wisdom. And I don't think fear is the same as love. And what I'm wrestling with now isn't whether Christianity is true or false at all. It's whether we've confused this control with holiness, whether we've protected our own instincts for punishment upward and just called it divine, whether what we've labeled as deep theology is sometimes just certainty that soothes anxiety. And I don't say that flippantly. I don't. Because if Jesus really exposed retributive logic instead of reinforcing it, if he really shifted the question from punishment to restoration, then maybe the narrow way isn't about being right. Maybe it's about refusing to weaponize love. Maybe it's about resisting the urge to turn mystery into control. I don't know. And look, I don't have this all figured out, but I do know this. Love that requires threats doesn't feel transcendent. Love that needs a kind of violence before it can forgive doesn't feel higher. And a God who collapses under honest questions probably isn't as big as we've been told. So maybe this dismantling isn't destruction. Maybe it's just clearing the space. Space for a version of faith that doesn't rely on fear. Space for justice that restores instead of retaliates. Space for goodness that isn't motivated by heaven or hell, but by care and mutual respect. And maybe the deepest thing we can do isn't defend a system. Maybe it's just to sit with attention long enough to let love get bigger than our need to control it. Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Clemens with a Z. If something in this conversation resonated with you, anyway, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at clemenswithaz@gmail.com or send me a DM over at Instagram at the Clemens with a Z Instagram podcast page. If you want to support the podcast, the easiest way you can do it is support it is by subscribing, rating, and leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with a friend, post it on your socials, drop it in a group chat. It all helps more than you know. And if you want to support the podcast financially, you can head over to clemenswithaz.com. There's a merch store with shirts, stickers, and all kinds of stuff. And you can also donate directly through the GoFundMe. There's a link in the show notes for all of that. Every little bit goes a long way in helping me keep these conversations going. Also, if you're looking for something a little bit more regular or you like reading rather than listening, you can check out my Substack, Devotions for the Disillusioned and Deconstructing. That's where I share short reflections, devotionals, and other stuff that don't always make it here on the podcast. You know, this podcast keeps going because of all of y'all showing up, engaging, and passing it on. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And thanks for being a part of this messy middle with me. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.